Chapter 4 Kolsvik. The Viking longship slices through the choppy waters, its hull groaning with the weight of the sea. Dark clouds loom ahead, stretching across the horizon like an ominous curtain. The salty spray of the waves dampens everything on deck, and the air is sick with tension. Royce, Octavia, and a handful of prisoners sit bound in the center of the ship, their wrists raw and red from the tightly tied ropes. Royce's eyes dart around the deck, his mind racing. He searches for a weapon, a distraction, anything that might help him escape. But the situation feels hopeless. The Vikings move about with precision, the hulking forms casting long shadows on the dim light. The sound of their voices mixes with the creaking of the ship and the distant rumble of thunder. Beside him, Octavia sits perfectly still, her expression calm and unreadable. She closes her eyes briefly, as if centering herself. Royce can't fathom how she remains so composed, not when every moment feels like a countdown to doom. The sound of heavy boots approaching snaps Royce of his thoughts. The man who had been perched at the prow of the ship, a towering figure draped in animal pelts, a wicked scar running across his jaw, descends onto the main deck. The chatter among the crew dies instantly as the leader strides towards the prisoners, his eyes scanning each face. Royce holds his breath as the man's gaze lingers on him. Then Octavia, then finally the others. His piercing stare feels like it's peeling away layers, seeing through their fear and defiance. Without a word, the man raises a gloved hand and points. "These four," he says, his voice low but carrying the crash of the waves. Before anyone can react, a group of Vikings steps forwards and yanks Royce, Octavia, and two others, a young man with a haunted look on his face and an older woman with a fierce, defiant glare, to their feet. Royce stumbles as they push him forward, his legs stiff from hours of sitting. The prisoners are herded toward a bench near the mast. The ropes around their wrists are cut away by a burly crewman. The coarse bindings drop to the deck, and Royce instinctively rubs his wrist, the angry marks left by the rope still fresh. Relief floods him, but it's short-lived as the Viking leader steps closer, his imposing frame blocking out the dim light. "Listen carefully," the leader begins, his voice as steady and unyielding as the sea. He gestures broadly to the open water around them. "Take a look. The sea stretches endlessly in every direction. My men outnumber you 10-1. If you want to try to escape, be my guest." His scarred face twists into a grim smirk. "If you want to play hero, your heroism will die with you." The young man opens his mouth, but one sharp look from the leader leads to silence. The other woman glares, her jaw tight, but she says nothing. The Viking points towards the horizon, where the dark storm clouds pulse with distant flashes of lightning. The wind is picking up, tugging at cloaks and hair. "A storm brews," the leader continues, his voice dropping into a growl. "And it will be upon us soon. The sea shows no mercy, and neither do I. But," he leans in slightly, his eyes narrowing, "you're being given a chance to save your miserable lives." Royce tensens, his jaw tightening. "What chance?" he asks, his voice cautious but firm. The leader's smirks widen. "We'll need all the hands to survive that we have. The wind will tear at the sails. The waves will drag us under. Help us weather the storm, and you might live to see another day. Fail," he shrugs, leaving the rest unsaid. Octavia Octavia finally speaks, her voice calm and deliberate. And after the storm, what happens to us? The leader's expression hardens, his tone growing colder. That depends. Prove yourselves useful and perhaps you'll earn some respect amongst us. Refuse. And he glances towards the rolling sea. You'll join the waves. The older woman spits at his feet. I'd rather drown than serve you, she snaps, her voice trembling with fury. The leader tilts his head, a spark of amusement flickering in his eyes. Drowning can be arranged, he replies smoothly. Then with a nod to his crew, he steps back. For now, you'll work. We'll see how strong your spirit is when the storm comes to claim us. The storm looms closer, the sky turning a menacing shade of grey, and the winds begin to whip through the rigging with a ghostly howl. The Viking crew shouts commands, their voices sharp and cutting through the chaos. Among the frantic activity, Royce, Octavia, and the other prisoners are shoved to the ship's oars. The scarred leader's voice cuts through the din. Take your place, he barks, pointing to the long wooden benches. Row or drown? It's your choice. Royce and Octavia exchange a quick glance, their expression tense but resolute. Royce and Octavia man one oar, while the younger man and the older women station themselves at the one across. Royce grips the smooth, heavy oar in front of him, the wood damp from spray and slick in his hands. He could feel the eyes of the Vikings boring into him, waiting for any sign of resistance. Octavia, seated beside him, positions herself with a grim determination, her fingers tightening around the oar. Row! One of the Vikings roars, cracking a whip against a wooden mast. The sharp snap makes Royce flinch, and he digs his feet into the deck for leverage, pulling on the oar with all of his strength. The ship lurches as the crew and prisoners row in unison, their efforts barely keeping the ship steady against the swelling waves. The sea churns, its surface boiling with whitecaps that crash against the side of the vessel. Water sprays into the boat, drenching everyone aboard. But the Vikings show no sign of stopping. Faster! A crewman yells, pacing along the row of oars. His eyes narrow as he passes Royce, who struggles against the weight of the oar. Put your back into it, you coward! Royce grits his teeth, the insult stoking a spark of defiance. He leans into the motion, every muscle in his body shrinking as he pulls. Octavia matches his rhythm, her face set with focused determination. Thunder cracks overhead, followed by a blinding flash of lightning that illuminates the chaos. The waves grow taller and the ship begins to rise and fall violently, each swell threatening to capsize them. The prisoners cling to the oars, their movements growing more frantic as the storm intensifies. The young man falters, his arms trembling as he gasps for breath. I can't, he stammers, his grip slipping on the oar. A Viking grabs him by the collar and yanks him upright. You'll row or you'll die, the Viking snarls, shoving the young man back toward the bench. The older woman beside him growls through gritted teeth. Leave him alone. He's doing his best. The Viking sneers but steps back, leaving the prisoners to their task. As if on cue, a massive wave slams into the side of the ship, sending a spray of icy water over the deck. The longship tilts dangerously, and for a heart-stopping moment, Royce thinks it might tip over completely. But the crew roars in unison, their combined efforts steadying the vessel as it steadies itself. The leader appears at the helm, his voice booming over the chaos. "Keep rowing! The storm won't break us if you won't break first." Another massive wave slams into the side of the ship, the impact jolting everyone aboard. The young man across from Royce is thrown from his seat, his body launching into the air like a ragdoll. He crashes into the roiling sea with a cry that is swallowed almost instantly by the deafening storm. For a fleeting moment, the prisoners freeze, their eyes darting to the churning waters, hoping to see him resurface. The older woman beside him lets out a panicked scream. "He's overboard! Help him!" She pleads, leaning over the edge, her hands clutching the rail as she scales the endless waves. But the Vikings show no such hesitation. Two crew members shove their way through the chaos, their faces cold and unfeeling. Without a word, one grabs the woman by her shoulders, ripping her from the rail. She struggles, crying out in desperation, but their protests are cut short as the Vikings unceremoniously shove her overboard. Her scream vanishes into the storm as quickly as the young man's. The crew wastes no time. The two Vikings drop onto the now vacant bench and grab hold of the oar, the powerful strokes immediately syncing with the rhythm of the others. The ship steadies slightly, its pace maintained as if nothing happened. To the Vikings, this is routine. The weak fall, the strong survive. How's it going, Thunder Thighs? Royce watches in silent horror, his hands gripping his oars so tightly his knuckles whiten. He glances over at Octavia, his heart pounding in his chest. Her face is pale but unreadable, her jaw clenched as she forces her body into the relentless rhythm of rowing. Their eyes meet for a fleeting moment, and in an exchange they both understand the brutal truth of the captain's earlier warning. Row or die. Royce takes a deep breath, the salt spray stinging his face. His muscles burn with exhaustion, but he forces himself to keep moving, his oars cutting through the water. "We're almost through! Keep pushing!" the captain barks, his voice cutting through the chaos of the storm like a whip. Royce grits his teeth, every muscle in his body screaming in protest, but the captain's word ignites a flicker of hope. He glances up, and through the sheets of rain and the unrelenting spray of the sea, he spots a faint glow ahead. Sunlight. His heart pounds with renewed determination as he digs the oar into the water, matching the rhythm of the crew. The violent waves, once towering like walls of fury, begin to ease, the peaks smoothing out into rippling swells. The deafening roar of the storm softens, and the relentless downpour fades into a gentle trickle. A single golden ray pierces through the dense clouds, illuminating the battered ship and its drenched occupants. For a moment, silence falls over the crew, broken only by the rhythmic sloshing of the oars against the calming waters. One by one, the legion of Viking ships emerge from the chaotic tempest of the storm into the calm, tempered light. Royce finally lets go of his oar, his arms trembling with exhaustion. He doubles over, his chest heaving as he gulps down the damp, salty air. Beside him, Octavia does the same, leaning forward with her hands on her knees, her breath ragged. Their eyes meet, and for the first time since the storm began, Royce sees a glimmer of relief in her steely expression. The sunlight grows stronger, cutting through the remnants of the storm, and the ship steadies as it emerges from the clutches of the tempest. Water glistens on every surface as if the ocean itself is breathing in the calm. The crew, though battered and soaked, moves about with renewed purpose. The ship's leader strides purposefully towards Royce and Octavia, his boots thudding against the dampened wooden planks. His presence commands attention as he lowers himself onto the bench in front of them. Resting his forearms on his knees, he leans slightly forward, his eyes piercing and locking onto Royce. "My name is Leaf," he begins, his voice steady, edged with authority. "And yours?" Royce straightens, meeting Leaf's gaze with an equal intensity. "Royce," he replies formally. Leaf studies him for a moment, his expression unreadable, before shifting his attention to Octavia. "And yours?" he asks. Octavia hesitates, her gaze flickering to Royce before settling on Leaf. "Octavia," she says evenly, her voice betraying none of the uncertainty she feels. Leaning back slightly, Leaf considers them, his tone carrying a weight of both practicality and intrigue. "You both did well," he says. "You pulled your weight, didn't try anything foolish. For that, I'll allow you to stay unbound." He pauses, his eyes narrowing slightly as he chooses his next words. "But understand this, you'll be expected to help around the ship. If you want to keep this freedom, you'll earn it." Royce nods, understanding the implied threat, while Octavia's expression remains carefully neutral. Leaf studies them both once more, then adds, almost as an afterthought, "Maybe the gods have more in store for you than I could foresee." Octavia's brow furrows at the mention of gods. She can't help herself. "Gods," she says, her tone tinged with defiance. "There's only one God." Leaf chuckles at her response, the sound rich and low. His amusement doesn't feel mocking, but rather steeped in a confidence born of experience. "You have much to learn, Octavia," he says, his eyes glinting with something between humor and curiosity. "Perhaps this journey will open your mind." Standing, Leaf motions toward the ship's bustling activity. We have a few days sail ahead of us. You're free to move about, but I expect you to pull your weight. Misstep, and your freedom will vanish as quickly as it was given. As Leaf walks away, Octavia exhales, her jaw tight. "Charming, isn't he?" she mutters. Royce shakes his head, leaning in closer. "We're alive and unbound for now. Let's keep it that way." The days pass as the ship carves its way through the vast expanse of the sea. Royce and Octavia quickly find themselves part of the daily rhythm of the life of the boat. Octavia, drawing on the seafaring knowledge instilled in her by her adventurous parents, helps with the rigging. Royce, though less familiar with ships, throws himself into rowing, his strength a valuable asset. Despite their situation, they begin to learn more about the Vikings. By night, the crew gathers, recounting stories of their ancestors, the battles they fought, and the gods they believe guide their fate. Royce listens intently, trying to make sense of the tales of Odin, Thor, and Freya, deities who represent strength, wisdom, and the unpredictable nature of the world. At first, Octavia is skeptical, her upbringing steeped in monotheistic faith. But as she watches the Vikings, she begins to see that their beliefs are not superstition, but as deep respect for the forces of nature and the challenges of life. She notices the reverence in the way they speak of the ocean, the storms, and the stars that guide their way. Leaf, true to his word, maintains a measured respect for Royce and Octavia. He speaks to them occasionally, often with cryptic remarks that hint at his belief that fate, or perhaps the gods, has a hand in their survival. Though his demeanor is commanding, there is a strange sense of fairness to him that neither Royce nor Octavia can ignore. As they adjust to the life aboard the ship, the intern the initial tension begins to give way to something more complicated. While Royce keeps his guard up, he can't help but notice the camaraderie among the Vikings, the way they face challenges together without hesitation. Octavia, too, finds herself conflicted, her disdain for their violent ways tempered by her growing admiration for their resilience and unity. But despite these observations, one question remains unanswered. Where are they being taken? And what lies ahead when they finally reach their destination? As Royce and Octavia tend to the remaining prisoners, offering what little comfort they can, their quiet efforts are suddenly interrupted. Leaf strides over with a rare burst of energy, his expression almost triumphant. Without an explanation, he grabs Royce and Octavia by their arms and pulls them to their feet, leading them towards the prow of the ship. "Look ahead," Leaf commands, his voice brimming with pride. He gestures towards the horizon. "You see that? Welcome to Norway." Royce squints against the sunlight, breaking through the scattered clouds, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. His eyes widen in wonder as the coastline comes into view. Towering cliffs rise dramatically from the water, the rugged edges softened by patches of lush green grass and trees. Waterfalls cascade down the cliffs, glittering like silver ribbons in the sunlight. Nestled at the base of the cliffs are small villages with wooden houses, the rooftops blending harmoniously with the natural surroundings. Smoke from the chimneys curls into the crisp air, and boats bob gently in the calm waters over secluded harbors. Octavia steps forward, her breath catching as she takes in the sight. Despite the circumstances, she can't deny the raw beauty of the land before her. "It's incredible," she murmurs, her voice barely audible over the crash of the waves against the ship. The crew erupts into cheers and cries of joy, their spirits lifted by the sight of their homeland. Many raise their fists into the sky, shouting thanks to their gods for guiding them safely through the storm. The air buzzes with an infectious sense of triumph, their voice echoing off the cliffs as the ship sails ever closer to shore. Leaf glances at Royce and Octavia, his expression softened now, but still commanding. "This is Norway," he says with pride. "Our home. The gods saw it fit to spare you in the storm, and now you stand on the brink of a new beginning. What that means is up to you." Royce exchanges a glance with Octavia, a mixture of awe and apprehension passing through them. While they marvel at the beauty of the land, the reality of the situation weighs heavy on their minds. They have achieved their goal of traveling east, but under the circumstances they are left with a feeling of uncertainty. The ship glides into the quaint harbor, the wooden hull creaking as they are secured to the docks. Crew members disembark eagerly, some jumping onto the planks with outstretched arms as if greeting the land itself. The once bound prisoners, now gathered from multiple ships, are crowded into a single group. Leaf, with a commanding stride, grabs Royce and Octavia by the arms and leads them off the ship. The bustling harbor falls momentarily quiet as Carrier's eyes turn towards the three of them. Whispers ripple through the crowd, villagers casting puzzling gazes as Leaf escorts strangers through the town, bypassing the other prisoners completely. "This is Kolsvik," Leaf declares, his voice swelling with pride as they step onto the dirt path that winds through the heart of the village. "This is my kingdom." Royce and Octavia take in the sights of the settlement. Small, sturdy houses with moss-covered roofs line the streets. The air hums with activity. The sharp clang of blacksmiths hammering glowing iron on anvils. The rhythmic scrape of craftsmen carving intricate designs into wood. And the vibrant chatter of villagers trading goods. Even amidst its rustic simplicity, Kosvik exudes a sense of craftsmanship and pride, a reflection of the Viking people who call it home. Women weave vibrant textiles on looms, while children chase each other through the streets, their laughter ringing out over the din. Leif leads them deeper into the village, the crowd parting before them, but never quite looking away. Some of the townsfolk seem weary of the newcomers, their gazes skeptical and untrusting. Others whisper to one another, their curiosity pique. Roy senses their stares and tenses instinctively, his grip tightening on the arm where Leif holds him. Octavia walks beside him, her face calm, though her eyes dart from side to side, taking in every detail of the village. Eventually, they reach a modest but sturdy hut at the edge of the village. Its walls are made of rough-hewn logs. The smoke curls from a small chimney. Leif pauses in front of the door, turning to Royce and Octavia. "This is where you'll stay," he says, his voice firm, yet oddly considerate. "I'll leave a few of my most trusted men outside for your safety." His piercing gaze shifts between the two of them. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk, and I'll explain what comes next." With a sharp gesture, he signals to the guards flanking him. Two burly men step forward, taking up positions on either side of the door. Their hands rest on the hilts of their swords. Royce hesitates as Leif steps away, watching the Viking disappear back into the village. Turning toward the hut, he glances at Octavia. What's his game? Why did he bring us here? Are we safe? His voice is low, almost a whisper, as if afraid the guards might overhear. Octavia pushes the doors aside and steps inside the hut, taking a moment to survey their new surroundings. The hut is simple, but functional. The scent of aged wood mingling with the faint smoke from the central fire pit. Two small beds rest against opposite walls, and a pile of neatly stacked firewood sits in the corner. She sinks into the nearest bed, her movements slow with exhaustion. "I don't know," she admits, closing her eyes briefly. "But if he wanted us dead, he wouldn't have brought us here at all. Let's not waste time guessing. Sleep first. Think later." Royce watches her lie back. Though her words are meant to reassure, they leave a knot of unease in his stomach. Still, he nods and moves to the other bed, sitting down heavily. His body aches with the ordeal of rowing through the storm and the long voyage. He glances towards the small window, where the last light of the day fades into the horizon, and the sounds of Kolsvik begin to quiet. As the fire in the hearth flickers softly, Royce lies back and lets his thoughts drift. Octavia's even breathing soon fills the room, and despite the uncertainty of their situation, exhaustion claims them both. And with that, I need a drink. I'm gonna cough. I can't believe I made it that long without coughing. Again, guys, I'm sorry. I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best. We're about to get up to our first option, guys. Okay, I promise you. Told you there was a lot of tone setting here. All right. Let's get some of this in here. Royce is jolted awake by the crack of the wooden doors swinging open. Standing in the doorway is Leif, his broad frame silhouetted against the morning light pouring in from behind him. His voice carries a casual authority. Let's get moving, Royce. Octavia's already about her day. Royce groans softly, rubbing the grit of sleep from his eyes. He swings his leg off the bed, the cold wooden floor sending a chill up his spine. What time is it? He mutters groggily. Time to make an impression, Leaf replies cryptically, his lips curling into a sly grin. Royce pulls on his boots and follows Leaf into the crisp morning air. The village is alive with activity. Children chase each other through the dirt streets. Vendors set up their stalls, and the blacksmiths hather at glowing metal in their forges. The air smells of salt from the nearby sea, mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil. As they approach the center of the town, Royce notices a crowd forming. The sound of cheering, jeering, and shouting fills the air, growing louder with each step. Leaf pushes forward, cutting through the throng of the villagers with Royce trailing closely behind. The energy of the gathering is infectious, the villagers buzzing with excitement. When they reach the front of the crowd, Royce sees the source of the commotion. In the middle of a wide open circle, two men are engaged in a heated contest. One stands tall and triumphant, a broadsword in his hand and a gleam of victory in his eye. Beneath him, another man lies in the dirt, breathing heavily, his own weapon knocked aside. The tip of the victor's blade hovers menacingly near the fallen man's head. The crowd erupts into cheers, some clapping while others slap their fists against their chest in show of admiration. Leaf laughs heartily beside Royce, clapping along with the crowd. It's a test of skill and strength, he explains, his voice carrying over the noise. A tradition, a spectacle. Royce's eyes remain fixed on the fallen man, who groans as he's helped to his feet. The winner raises his sword high, basking in the adoration of the crowd before stepping aside to allow another contender to take his place. Leaf suddenly turns to Royce, a spark of mischief in his eyes. What do you think? Fancy your chances? Royce blinks, caught off guard. Me? You want me to fight? Leaf chuckles and pats him firmly on the back. Why not? I saw you fight in Blackwater. Besides, he adds, his tone softening slightly. You have a chance to win some of the people over. Show them you're capable of holding your own. You're more than just a prisoner. The crowd, sensing the conversation, turns its attention to Royce. Dozens of curious eyes fall on him, some skeptical, others intrigued. A few voices call out, urging him to step forward. Royce hesitates, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He glances at Leaf, who nods encouragingly, and then at the crowd, who seems eager for fresh entertainment. His mind races. This could be an opportunity to earn a sliver of respect among these people, but it could also go horribly wrong. My friends, you have waited long enough. It is time for the first options of the night. What should we do? Should Royce fight in the gauntlet, or should he refuse? Vote! Vote! Let me just dance to the music meanwhile. We have a new way of doing it, Nikki. We have a new way of doing it. Guys, is the music to my voice level, is it good? Or does the music need to come down? 8-0. Bean, how's it going, my sister? It's good? We got about a minute left to vote. A minute left to vote. Oh. Other than my throat and lungs being fucked, great. This is a fucking landslide. I should have used this opportunity to piss. We've got 10 people voting tonight, my friends. Hey, let's give it up to you guys, the chat. Thank you guys, for real. Thank you so much to you guys for being here on a weekly basis and helping write this story. Thank you. To all of you, thank you so much. Honestly, it means so much to me. I put a lot of time into writing these chapters, and I'm glad that people enjoy it. I really am. I really am glad that people enjoy it. All right. Let me hack up a log really quick. With that being said, Chad has decided to fight. Royce clenches his fist, taking a deep breath. All right, he says, stepping forward into the circle. I'll give it a shot. The crowd roars in approval, villagers stomping their feet and shouting in excitement. Leaf claps Royce on the shoulder with a grin. Good lad. Now, let's see what you're made of. As Royce steps into the circle, the defeated man is helped away, and the other contender steps forward. And another contender steps forward. A tall, broad-shouldered Viking with a scar running down the side of his face. He grins at Royce, his confidence evident. A sword is handed to Royce. Unlike his axes, its weight is unfamiliar in his grip, but not entirely unwelcoming. The scarred Viking twirls his blade effortlessly, clearly experienced, while Royce tests the balance of his own weapon with a nervous but determined expression. The crowd falls into an anticipatory hush as the two men face each other. Royce feels the eyes of the villagers on him, the weight of their judgment almost heavy as the sword in his hands. Begin! A voice yells. The circle erupts into cheers once more as the clash of blades rings across the square. And with that being said, my friends, we are about to do something completely different. We have decided that when we come into battle stages now, we will have two different outcomes. And we will leave it up to fate to decide the outcomes. I will roll a d20. Live on camera. And it will decide whether we win or we lose the fight. Is that fair? Is that fair, chat? I will roll a d20. If it's a 1 through 10, we lose. If it's an 11 through 20, we win. So, my friends, let's see what happens. Oops. Let's see what happens. Are we ready to roll the die? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The crowd watches eagerly, their cheers turning into a hum of excitement as the two men circle one another. Royce's hands feel the weight of the sword, unfamiliar and clumsy in his grasp, but he knows he can't show weakness. He watches his opponent closely, noting the man's movements, the way he holds his weapon with ease, his posture confident and relaxed. Royce tightens his grip, trying to mimic the Viking stance. The first strike comes quickly, a slash aimed at Royce's midsection. He manages to block it, the dull blade scraping against his own in a screech of metal. The crowd roars in approval. Royce takes a half step back, trying to regain his footing and assesses his opponent's movements. His adversary doesn't hesitate. The Viking feints to the left, then swings his sword with an impressive speed towards Royce's right side. Royce barely has time to react, stumbling backward as the sword taps his shoulder. No more than a harmless nudge, but enough to throw him off balance. The crowd laughs, the sound thick with amusement. Royce's cheeks flush, the sting of embarrassment sharper than any physical blow. He grits his teeth, trying to keep focus. The Viking presses forward, using his experience to keep Royce on the defensive. Royce swings wildly, but his strikes lack any finesse of his opponent's controlled movements. The Viking dodges easily, a mocking grin on his face. Royce's movements become heavier, slower, as fatigue begins to take hold. Another swing from his opponent, this time aimed at Royce's legs. Royce jumps back, but his foot catches an uneven stone, and he stumbles, barely managing to stay upright. The Viking sees the opening and charges. Royce raises his sword to block the incoming blow, but the Viking's weapon slides down the length of his own, the impact rattling his arms. Before Royce can recover, the Viking's sword lands a tap against his chest. Again, nothing more than a dull thud. Before Royce can adjust, the Viking lands his final blow. With a swift movement, he lands a kick on Royce's chest. The blow sends Royce sprawling to the ground, gasping for air. The Viking moves forward, putting his sword on Royce's neck. His chest heaving, but his grin never fades. Royce lays frozen for a moment, his breath heavy and ragged. Leif's voice calls out from the edge of the circle, his tone amused with a hint of respect. Enough! The man is beaten! The Viking steps forward, helping Royce to his feet. Clapping on the shoulder with a mockingly congratulatory, God fucking damn it, thud. You've got guts at least, the Viking says, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. The crowd laughs again, but Royce can't help but feel a small flicker of something. Perhaps respect, or maybe just relief that the match is over. He straightens up, meeting the Viking's eye, a slight acknowledgement passing between them. Leif steps forward, escorting Royce from the center of the circle. You did well enough, he says, to Royce with a nod of approval, though his voice carries a tinge of amusement. It's not about winning every fight, but about showing you've got heart to fight. That goes a long way with our people. Leif leads Royce away from the crowd, weaving through the bustling streets of the village. Royce's initial impression of the settlement as a modest outpost quickly fades as they pass through the marketplace. Workshops and large communal spaces. The village sprawls far beyond what is imagined. More of a thriving city than a simple harbor town. The sheer scale of activity surprises Royce, but with each step, his thoughts begin to drift elsewhere. He can't shake his concern for Octavia, nor the gnawing question of why Leif is investing so much time in them. Former prisoners, strangers, who had been at the mercy of the crew just a few days ago. The thought finally pushes him to speak. Leaf, Royce begins, hesitant. Where's Octavia? Is she alright? He pauses and then continues before Leaf can answer. And I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but I have to ask, why are you doing this for us? A few days ago we were prisoners. Now you're showing us your home and treating us like guests? What's your plan for us? Leaf slows his pace, his broad shoulders tensing slightly as Royce's words settle. He steps ahead, then turns to face Royce fully, his expression unreadable but intent. Firstly, Octavia is fine, Leaf says, his voice steady. She's being well looked after. And well, we'll meet her later at the celebration. His tone is reassuring, but Royce notices a flicker of calculation between his words. Leaf takes a moment, pacing a few steps back and forth before continuing. And as for my plan for you two, Leaf pauses, searching for the right words. Initially, there wasn't one. But on the ship, I couldn't help but think about how valiantly you both fought at Blackwater. And then the storm. He gestures to the sea as if it's still etched in his mind. It was a test. A test to see if you could be trusted. You didn't try to run. You didn't make any foolish moves. That showed me something. Royce frowns, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Showed you what? Leaf stops pacing and looks Royce square in the eye. You see, many people believe in my people believe in fate, Royce. I believe in fate. And everything that's brought you and I to this point feels fated. I don't have the words to explain it, but there's something about you and Octavia. I believe you're here for a reason. To help me. To help my people. Royce stares at him, unsure of what to say. The weight of Leaf's words hangs heavy between them. Fate? It seems both absurd and oddly comforting, but Leaf's conviction is undeniable. Breaking the silence, Leaf steps back and gestures down the path. That's why I need to get to know both of you. What drives you? What you're capable of? Whether I can trust you. Until then, you'll be under my protection. But make no mistake, just because you walk amongst me doesn't mean you have the respect of my people. That has to be earned. When opportunities arise, take them. Prove yourself. Royce nods, the gravity of Leaf's words sinking in. I understand, he says quietly, his voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. Leaf gives him a final look, a flicker of something almost like approval in his eyes, before turning and continuing down the path. Royce follows, his thoughts racing. Leaf gives him a final look, a flicker of something almost like approval in his eyes, before turning and continuing down the path. Royce follows, his thoughts racing. The two continue their journey through the bustling city, making stops at various points of interest. They pause at vendors hawking finely crafted wares, jewelry, weapons, and colorful fabrics, and even share a drink at one of the lively alehouses. Along the way, Leaf engages with the townsfolk, exchanging hearty laughs with some and serious words with others. Royce observes carefully, noting the respect Leaf commands wherever they go. For Royce, it's a whirlwind of new sights, sounds, and experiences. And as the day passes in what feels like an instant. As dusk begins to settle over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Leaf concludes a conversation with an elderly man selling furs. He turns to Royce, his expression bright with energy. A broad grin spreads across his face, and his eyes sparkle with excitement. Well then, Leaf says, clapping his hands together. I suppose it's time we join in on the celebration. Royce raises an eyebrow, both intrigued and slightly confused. What's the celebration for? He asks. Leaf chuckles, a booming sound that echoes through the street, and slaps Royce on the shoulder with a friendly but firm hand. For our bountiful raid, of course. And for our 2 new guests. Now come on, let's not keep the others waiting. Before Royce can fully process Leaf's words, the Viking leader is already striding ahead. His steps purposeful and lively. Royce hurries to keep up, following Leaf as they weave through the lively streets. As they near the heart of the city, Royce begins to notice a shift in the atmosphere. The streets grow more crowded, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and the sound of laughter, music, and cheering. Finally, they arrive at a massive wooden building that dominates the square. Royce stops in his tracks, his breath catching at the sight. The architecture is unlike anything he's ever seen. Grand, imposing, yet intricately detailed. The walls are adorned with carvings of mythical beasts, and above the towering double doors, 2 sculpted dragon heads loom. The craftsmanship so lifelike they appear ready to spring to life at any moment. The sheer artistry and the scale of the sculpture leave Royce in awe. That, Leaf says, noticing Royce's reaction, is the Great Hall of Kolsvik. It's where we feast, celebrate, and honor the gods. My home. A line of stern-faced guards stand at the entrance, each armed and armored, their eyes scanning the crowd with sharp precision. As Leaf approaches, they immediately step aside, bowing their heads slightly in deference. With a confident stride, Leaf leads Royce towards the gates, past the heavy doors, and into the grand hall beyond. Inside, the scene is nothing short of extraordinary. The hall is alive with activity. Long wooden tables stretch across the room, laden with food and drink, while a roaring fire crackles in the center, casting flickering light on the high beams above. The walls are adorned with shields, banners, and tapestries that tell stories of past victories. Vikings of all ages mingle, laughing, singing, and sharing tales of their exploits. Leaf stops and turns to Royce with his grin widening. Welcome to the celebration, Royce. Tonight, you'll eat, drink, and celebrate like one of us. Let's see if you can keep up. Leaf walks confidently into the grand hall, Royce cheering behind him, taking in the grandeur and energy of the celebration. The clamor of laughter, the clinking of mugs, and the rhythmic beat of drums fill the air. Vikings cheerfully raise the goblets in toast after toast as the scent of roasted meats and spices wafts through the room. Royce is struck by the vibrancy of the scene. It's a world so different from what he has ever known. Leaf turns to Royce, his voice raised over the noise. Come, there's someone I think you'd be pleased to see. With purposeful steps, Leaf weaves through the crowd, nodding to the occasional Viking who calls out his name or raises a mug in his honor. Royce struggles to keep up, his eyes scanning the room until they land on a familiar figure near the head of the hall. Seated at one of the prominent tables is Octavia. She looks more composed than Royce expects, though the weight of the recent days is still faintly visible in her eyes. She wears a simple but clean tunic provided by their host, and she's engaged in conversation with an older Viking woman seated beside her. At the sight of Royce, her face lights up with a faint smile, relief mingled with curiosity about where Royce had been. Octavia! Royce calls out, quickening his steps. She rises from her seat as he approaches, and they share a brief, silent exchange that speaks volumes. Relief that they both made it this far. A shared curiosity about what's to come. Leaf steps between them, his broad shoulder cutting an imposing figure as he gestures to the long, elevated head table that overlooks the entire hall. Take a seat, both of you, he says with a smirk. You're my guest of honor tonight. Royce and Octavia exchange wary glances but obey, settling at the table as Leaf moves to to stand at the center, his presence commanding attention. The hall begins to the hall begins to quiet as Leaf raises his hand. The rhythmic beat of the drum ceases. The Vikings turn their attention to their leader, mugs in hand, their expressions eager. Leaf stands tall, his voice booming through the room, effortlessly filling every corner of the great hall. Brothers and sisters, he begins, his tone both warm and powerful. Tonight, we celebrate. We celebrate the raid that brought wealth and honor to Korsvik. We celebrate our safe passage through a brutal storm that threatened to take us. We celebrate you, the brave men and women who made it possible. And we celebrate the fallen, those who fought valiantly and now drink and feast with the gods in Valhalla. A thunderous cheer erupts from the crowd, mugs raised high, some Vikings pounding their fists around the tables in agreement. Leaf pauses, letting the energy settle just enough before continuing. His voice softens slightly, taking on a more reflective tone. But tonight, we also welcome two new faces into our hall, Royce and Octavia. He gestures towards them, and all the eyes in the room turn their way. Royce straightens in his seat, feeling the weight of the moment, while Octavia holds her composure, her gaze steady. They were strangers when we took them aboard our ships. Leif continues, his voice steady but commanding. Prisoners, outsiders. Through their actions, they have proven themselves worthy of a chance amongst our people. In the storm, they fought alongside us. They rode for hours, helping propel us to safety. They did not falter. They showed strength, resilience, and courage. A murmur of approval ripples through the hall, and the Vikings nod in agreement. Royce feels his chest tighten, unsure whether the praise is a gift or a burden. Octavia remains calm but wary, her mind likely racing with thoughts of what Leaf's words might mean in the future. Leaf raises his mug, his voice rising to a crescendo. So, tonight, we drink not only to our victory, but the possibilities that fate has brought to us. To Royce, to Octavia, to our victory, to our spoils, to the fallen, and to whatever the purpose the gods have for all of us here in Korsvik. The hall erupts into cheers and applause, mugs slamming together, ale sloshing over the sides of the Vikings' toast in unison. Royce and Octavia exchange a glance, both understanding the gravity of their position. They're no longer prisoners in chains, but they're not entirely free either. The future here in Korsvik will depend on the choices they make, the trust they earn, and the trials they face. Leaf claps Royce on the back, his grin wide and genuine. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourselves tonight, he says. But remember, tomorrow the work begins. With that, he raises his mug again and takes a hearty swig, joining the crowd in their celebration as the hall fills once more with sounds of laughter, song, and life. As the celebration continues, Royce and Octavia find themselves swept up in the energy of the hall. Plates of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sweet meat are passed their way, and for the first time in what feels like forever, they eat without restraint. Royce notices how the Vikings around them drink deeply and laugh freely, the camaraderie evident in every interaction. It's a strange sight. These people who were once captives now feel almost humanized in their shared joy. Yet, beneath the surface of the revelry, Royce can't shake the undercut of tension. Leaf's speech, the warm and full of praise, was also a warning. They were being tested. Every Viking's eye that glances their way feels like an evaluation, weighing their worth. Octavia, sitting beside him, seems more composed, but Royce could tell by the way her fingers drum softly against the wooden table that she feels that too. After what feels like hours, the pace of the celebration begins to slow. The musicians switch to softer tunes, and the Vikings gather in smaller clusters, deep in conversation or enjoying a quiet drink. Leif, still lively but visibly less guarded, approaches Royce and Octavia once more, his mug nearly empty. "Come," he says, his tone warm but insistent. "There's someone I want you to meet." Royce and Octavia exchange a quick glance but follow Leif without hesitation. He leads them through a hall and toward a shadowy corner where an elderly woman sits on a carved wooden chair, her presence commanding despite her frail frame. Her silver hair is intricately braided, and her piercing eyes seem to be far more than what's in front of her. "This is Solvig," Leif says, gesturing towards the woman. "This is our Wolve, our Ceres, a voice of the gods and a keeper of wisdom. She is asked to speak with you." Roy stiffens at the word Ceres. He glances at Octavia, who arches a skeptical eyebrow but says nothing. Solvig's eyes flick between them, her gaze sharp and knowing. "You," Solvig says, her voice low but steady as she looks directly at Royce. "Step forward." Royce hesitates but takes a step closer. Solvig reaches out a bony hand, palm up. "Your hand," she commands. And with that, my friends, we are met with our next option. What should Royce do? Vote! Oh shit. Wrong music. What should Royce do? In front of the Wolva, the Ceres of the town. What should he do? You weren't paying attention. Boo. We have about 60 seconds left to vote. I mean, it's a big moment. It's a big moment. Seven to two. 7-2. As we approach 30 seconds left in the voting process. Time ticks away. 8-2. Time is ticking away. It looks like for the second time tonight we're going to have a landslide. It appears that way. There it is. Royce turns and looks at the leaf. He nods subtly, and Royce, despite every instinct telling him to pull away, extends his hand. And that, my brothers and sisters, scene! Chapter 4